I think we are going to kick this wonderful session off. As you know, Mark will be interviewing Tom Cipullo. We're very excited to see him again. He wrote a wonderful piece for us and we loved it. And we're going to hear what makes a composer a composer.
Katie, you actually gave me right segue into my first question. Yes. Hi, Tom.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see so many wonderful faces.
So I'll just fill in a little bit. So we've been doing this series of talents that we could not by any means claim to have discovered Tom Cipullo, because he had already been discovered by the world by the time Cecilia Chorus worked with him. But we've had a series of interviews with artists who have engaged with us some way or another, which Tom is going to do on an exercise about songwriting, and then talk about sort of their work and their profession and their lives and pry into their innermost souls. So I could set the scene, I think, by saying that Tom and I go way, 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 way back. I was reflecting on that and thinking it's probably about 30 years, right? Something like that.
Is it that I'm no judge of time. It's all a blur to me. But I know it's a long, long time back to the Shadows Around the House.
Shadows Around the House was a piece that Tom wrote for Cantori New York, another chorus I direct, that we recorded that group recorded in 1997. So that's about 25 years ago. So the time passes for sure. And that was a wonderful experience. And Tom and I have done a number of things together one way or another since. Cantori did another piece of his. And I conducted the very first iteration of Tom's opera Glory Denied, which has become one of the most performed operas around, it seems. So
it amazes me. I don't know. I didn't know what I was doing, you know. My first opera, I had no experience. I just got lucky.
So
the right thing at the right time.
Yes, and we have a number of visitors for the Monmouth Civic Chorus here who are remembering the piece that you wrote for Monmouth Civic Chorus, which was also a long time ago, Voices of the Young.
Long time ago, yeah. Voices of the Young.
Yeah.
And it was all high school
poetry.
Their poetry.
And we have an anecdote about that we'll get to, about the telephone, which is always my favorite story ever. So, Tom Cipullo, one of the first questions that's always on my mind is sort of what Katie said, which is, at what point in one's life does one say, I am a composer? How do you know?
Oh. You know what they always say, that the only reason to do this is that you can't imagine your life doing anything else, right? Anything in the arts, it's just unthinkable. I think most composers know very young. You feel it at 15 or 16, and you then it becomes a compulsion, and you just keep doing it. Would that someone had talked me out of it. But I remember going to college thinking I want to be a history teacher. I love history, and but somehow I wound up a music major, and it's very, very odd, these roads that take us these different directions, right? One false step and our lives go in a completely different direction. But for music, you know, one can't help but reflect what a wonderful. Is there anything else that'll make you broke and unfamous that can make you so happy? I don't know. It's it's a weird feeling, but I think one knows it very young and cannot escape it.
And what is the it that one knows? What is it? What is it to be? What is it? So I'll offer you a thought. I teach with people who worked with Nadia Boulanger, who was a big music teacher of the 20th century. And one thing she used to say that is often quoted is she used to say, composers are born and then made.
Oh.
So there is something innate. And I'm wondering if you have experienced that innateness and what is that innate thing that you have? What is it?
I think it's, you brought me here, and you're kind enough to speak to me, but composers are probably the least self-aware and least articulate individuals on the face of the earth. And the more we know about ourselves, the worse it is for our music, you know. But I can tell you that I don't know, if you could put these things into words, you wouldn't be compelled to do them. Have you ever seen that movie, The Red Shoes? You know, that there's that wonderful scene in the beginning, and it's such a beautiful movie. And Lermontov, the great ballet impresario, asked a beautiful Maurice Shear, and why is it you want to dance? And she says, why do you want to live? And he says, I don't know, but I must. It's a compulsion. And
Would you say that you...
all composers I know have this too. If you don't have this, you'd fall by the wayside. You have to do it. I don't know.
Let me ask another kind of question. What is composing? And do you think our understanding of that has changed and maybe is still changing? What is composing?
Composing is basically putting things together, whether you're putting a newspaper together or putting music together, putting disparate elements together and getting to blend and to turn into something larger than the elements themselves. Has it changed? I think the fashions that revolve around it change. There's certainly, at different periods, what we look for in a composer is different. We look for things to be more groundbreaking at times. At times we look for things that are more nostalgic. We look the materials they use and what we expect of them changes and goes through shifts, I think. But the actual act of composition, I don't think that changes. The actual craft of putting things together. Does that make any? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was reading today, there's a new book by a fellow named George Saunders about fiction writing, and I happened to pick it up. I'm spending a lot of time in bookstores. And I thought of our interview tonight, and I thought I wanted to mention this comment of his. He thinks very talented writers, and he says the ones that he thinks go on to publish are the ones who can somehow introduce a notion of causality into their work, meaning that one thing really leads to the next thing. And I thought,
well, yeah.
I wondered what you might have to say about that.
Well, one quote that's been very important to me, and I was, with the numerous people here, I thought somebody might want to be a composer, or start composing, so we'll talk about that later. But there's a quote about composing that I love that was really inspiring to me, and from Aaron Copland, and he said, when we compose, what we are really doing is we create an illusion. We create the illusion of inevitability, as if our music had to go a certain way when it could go any way at all. But we make it seem as if it fell from heaven and had to be this way. So that was an important realization for me. And then beyond that, I thought, beyond the inevitability, if we can somehow surprise at the same time. Now, sometimes it seems like surprise and inevitability can't work together, but no, they do. They can work together. And when they do, if we can get that, then we have something. I mean, that's the ultimate you aspire to. We surprise someone and then they say, yes, it had to be that way, but I never saw it coming. And that's the type of thing I look for. I would aspire to anyway.
And how do you think surprise happens? Who are models?
Surprise happens in composing. Yeah. Surprise happens when you don't. Well, I mean, I'll tell you how I do it. Now I have some trepidation talking about how I compose. I go through things over and over, and I look for how I can make that better, how I can make that different. You never get it the first way. I go through with a red pencil, and I circle it, and I say, I can make this better. And particularly when you get to a moment, when you get to what is your moment, they always say composers have to be able to analyze their own music. They have to know what is the important part. And it's not easy. Sounds like it should be easy to know what is the important moment. But, self-deception, that's what artists do better than any other group in the world. So we find our moment, and then I just have to ask myself, what can I do? There's another quote I found very meaningful, and there was a great composer named Stephen Albert who won the Pulitzer Prize, died very young in a car accident, tragically. But he said, I've come to believe that so much of what we do is just an accretion of details, piling detail upon detail to get the most out of what we're trying to express. And I think there's a lot of that in composing. But you know, when I talk about composing, I have to confess, I have no idea how it's done. It's all a mystery. And I talk to a lot of composers like this, and every time we sit down, I'll just speak for myself. Every time I sit down, it's like reinventing the wheel. I cannot remember how it's done. I know I noodle around on the piano, I look for motives or I look for things, but where does it come from? I have no idea. And that word inspiration, after all, that means something else breathes through us. Isn't that literally what it means, really? So the hardest part, this might be true for more than just composition. The hardest part maybe in life is getting yourself out of the way. And for a composer to get him something to distract him, to get himself out of the way so that he can let whatever is underneath come out. That, when you can do that, do you know how many composers look back at their work and say, where did that come from? I have no idea how I did that. What is that? Where did that come from? And if I can drone on a little bit longer, sure. You would not believe how many composers distract themselves when they work. I like to put on a baseball game on the radio in the background, if I can get one, because what's a baseball game? You know, you don't even pay attention to it half the time anyway. It just sort of distracts you a little bit. But I know a very famous composer who used to put on the Today Show every day when he composed on the TV, soft in the background. And another one who loved Oprah Winfrey and would always put on Oprah Winfrey when he composed in the background. So the arts, getting out of your own way is so important.
Not
I wish
easy.
I knew it.
Right.
Not easy. A good trick to do it.
I was wondering about teachers that you had. I first want to ask, I'm going to ask the question in two parts. The first one is teachers that you reflect on really favorably. People, first specifically teachers, and then also you mentioned Copeland, but people you feel influenced by. But let's start with teachers, people you actually worked with. You don't have to name any names unless you want to, but.
Well, I do want to. I had the greatest teacher in the world, one of the most famous and influential, and that was David Del Tredici, who I still think of as my teacher, to be honest with you. That's the nature of great teachers, isn't it?
Can you tell us a bit about who he
if
is?
you don't know, yeah, sorry. David was in the forefront of the return to tonality, of bringing tonality back as a real viable means to create music at a time when none of the so-called serious composers, or very few of them, I mean, maybe there was Rorem and a few, but most were not using tonality. And when he did that, he had been a serialist. He had composed music in a rather austere idiom with what we might call dissonance, although that's actually consonance because everything is consonant, what we would think of as dissonance. And he was like the prodigal son of that. He was a great success in doing that. But then he went back and said, no, I'm going back to tonality. That's who I am. And when he did that and started really the new romanticism, everything became possible again for composers. And suddenly we could use, that would be around 1981 or so. I mean, he started playing like 79. And then in 81, he won the Pulitzer Prize for In Memory of a Summer Day. So that was, but a long time, those composers who wrote atonal music held a lot of power and held a lot of sway. And David gave us a lot of freedom. We're in this, they say this golden age of opera now, and where opera companies are doing, it's unthinkable for an opera company not to do a contemporary opera now. 20 years ago, exact opposite. They would never do one. You could not threaten them. You could not blackmail them to do one. Part of that comes from, I think, the fact that we can all use anything we want, pop music, vernacular music, folk music, anything we want now to express a story. And a lot of that started with David. He taught a very famous course once where he said to everybody in the class, he said, all of you have a secret music that you're embarrassed to tell anyone you do, anyone in a college environment. You're ashamed to tell them that you like cowboy music, country music, you like folk songs, you like church music, you like musical theater, but you'll never tell your composition teacher. You like rap, you like, anything. And he said, in this class, you are going to use that music to be the basis of what you do. And imagine how challenging and liberating. That's why he was such a great teacher. And, one of the great composers and orchestrators of the 20th and 21st century.
So I want to pick up
That's
on.
one of.
Go ahead.
I have more.
Go.
Then I studied before that, as an undergraduate, I studied with Elie Sigmeister. Terrifying. Wonderful teacher, but terrifying. Nadia Boulanger student, could do anything. Give him a piece of music, with 17 staves, all in different clefs and transpositions, could sit down and play it better than me who wrote it. And, but he gave me a lot of very useful information, I think.
Any examples come to mind?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Any examples come to mind of things that Elie Sigmeister told you?
He told me a lot about writing songs. He told me one time, can I tell you the worst lesson I ever had? If I'm droning off, I hope I'm not droning on too much. One day, I was 19, 20 years old. I was far from his favorite student, and deservedly so. I was not precocious. It took me a long time to figure out what I was doing, if I ever did. So I go to my lesson with Elie Sigmeister, who had, quite a good reputation, wrote a lot of operas, was very well known. And he looked at me and he said, "And what have you brought for today's lesson?" And I said, "Well, Mr. Sigmeister, I said this so proudly, I have brought a setting of a Shakespeare sonnet." And he looked at me, I think he raised an eyebrow even as he looked, and he said, "Of course you realize in the almost 400 years since Shakespeare's death," this was a while ago, in the 400 years since Shakespeare's death, there has never been a successful setting of a Shakespeare sonnet. And all of us have tried. Now let's look at yours," he said. And so that was kind of a sinking feeling.
Did he like it?
It was tough, but good.
Did he like it?
No, I don't think he liked it very much.
He didn't like your song?
He didn't like my music, and he was right not to like it.
Mm.
There were a lot of people who were a lot more advanced than I was at that age. But I was figuring it out. And the hardest thing for a composer is to figure out who he or she is. Who am I? What is my language? What do I want to express?
Do you think of having a voice?
Yeah. I mean, that's the most important thing. It's much more important than the style you work in. It's something you can't analyze, you can't express, but you know it when you hear it, as the Supreme Court might say. And it is undeniable when you hear it. And that's where the interest comes from. Just like we all have certain singers we love, I bet, who are not always the best. They're not always have the most beautiful voice, but they have something about them. It's goes beyond words. That's what we aspire. I aspire to it. Hopefully one day I'll get to it.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to come back to something you said that I thought was interesting. That was a bit of a throwaway line you just gave us about atonal music where everything is consonant. And I think it would be worth your explaining to us what you meant.
Well, we think of the harsh clashing sounds as dissonant because if you come to if you come to I don't know if you can hear anything. If you hear a clash, it has to resolve, right? It has to move to beauty, to consonance. Dissonance must move to consonance. But in the atonal period, you were allowed to rest on those clashing sounds. They were considered, for lack of a better word, stable or pleasing. the amazing thing about music, which mirrors life, and we don't talk about enough, is, dissonance, those clashing sounds. Those are the most beautiful sounds in any piece. Those are the most expressive sounds. That is the beauty of romantic era harmony. It's that's where all the passion is. That's when you hit those dissonant sounds, a chord, and you never want to let it go. That is a fantastic moment, whether it be a suspension, a simple 4/3 suspension, or something more complicated. Those are the moments that break your heart and move your soul. And in atonal music, you don't have that anymore because they don't have to be solved. There's not that pull.
Is
That's
there
my
any
very simple understanding.
is there any
Not,
atonal?
I don't have a complex thought about it. I'm not a theorist. I just react to it emotionally. That's all.
Sure. Is there any atonal music you feel is immortal?
What's great is, sure, there's lots of it. Certainly, Moses and Aaron of Schoenberg.
That's an opera,
It's,
right?
that's an opera. It's a unbelievable, unbelievable piece of music. There are lots of them. I don't want to go into them. I'll start blanking and thinking. But anything can be made to make great music, any style. Like when I was with David Tredic and he was writing tonal music again. Yeah, if everybody could be like Schoenberg, that music is great, written in an atonal style. He could write in either way, right? Schoenberg, he was the most romantic of the romantics when he wanted to be. But that's who he was. It's when you get forced into being that and you're not that, which is where a lot of us were in the 70s and early 80s, that's where the pain comes in.
Yeah. So that was a little bit, I don't know if this happened to you, but so you've mentioned two teachers that were particularly influential, who are Ellie Sigmeister and David Del Tredici in a good way.
Right.
There's one more, I think you worked with Thea Musgrave, is that right?
Yes. And I didn't study composition with her, I studied orchestration. And
So just
brilliant.
tell us who she
She's
was.
still brilliant.
Yeah.
No, she's over 90, and I had the pleasure of having a drink at her home, her and her husband, Peter Mark, before this whole thing happened. She is unbelievable. And everything is so, she taught us to be practical in the best way. I mean, her palette is amazing, what she can put together, but everything always works, and it works in a wonderful way. She is one of the truly great composers of the 20th and 21st century. And of course, as an opera composer, she's thrilling. Her Mary Queen of Scots is an amazing piece. She told us all, she gave me this piece of advice, which is very unusual, I think. She said a composer should always write his own libretto. And that nobody else says that but Thea Musgrave. And she said, it doesn't have to be the greatest thing, but only a composer knows what you need. And you know what? I've been lucky. I've worked with a very good librettist on a few occasions. I've been very lucky to work with David Mason. But so often I see very accomplished writers who have no idea what should be in an opera libretto and really shouldn't be doing it. It's not like a play. Can I tell you the difference between an opera libretto and a play?
Sure.
In a play, they say, if you see a gun on a table in the first act, they always say in a play, that gun has to go off in the second act, right? In an opera, it doesn't. In an opera, what happens is the gun goes off in between Act 1 and Act 2, and then everybody comes back in Act 2 and says, I sure miss Uncle Charlie. Except for one guy who sings, I always hated Uncle Charlie and I'm glad I killed him, all at the same time. So that's, you get away with telling, not showing in an opera. And everything has to be sung. Words are different when they have to be sung. And they have to be sung more than one person at a time. And, that's a whole, and they have to, I don't know, just the fun world.
Yeah. So we mentioned Thea, who,
Yeah.
yeah, she is extraordinary, and that's a whole other conversation. But I wondered, and it may or may not, it may not be the case, if there were teachers or people who guided you, whose guidance you look back on and say, that was bad, that was not helpful.
I think anyone who's ever gone to music school has had a horrible experience with a teacher. Sometimes brutal, sometimes brutal in under the illusion of being hard truth, and maybe sometimes you do have, what do they call that, tough love. But if you go to so many schools, particularly in the 80s, the amount of people who dropped out, who learned to hate music within 3 years is amazing. And it's just why it should be so. When I went to Boston University in the 80s, and there were, my first semester there, David Del Tredici wasn't there. He was on leave. He had just won the Pulitzer. And there were some nice, and there were some nice, wonderful people. But there were so many teachers who were just mean and bitter. The president of the university was kind of famously nasty at that point. And it is amazing how the head, we've seen this, haven't we, in recent days, the head of an organization can turn everything nasty. And when that changes, it gets better. Anyway, so I had this first semester that's horrible. David Del Tredici comes back. At that point, he was the most famous name at that university and the most famous classical composer. And he was the nicest one there. And I thought, you know what? That's it. You don't have to be bitter. It has nothing, bitter doesn't, it's just a bad reflection on you. So I always wanted to be like that if I could be. I wanted to be the guy who was kind of successful. And when I go to David's birthday parties, I would always make a toast to him. That was something that Spencer Tracy said about Walter Houston at a party. If you remember Spencer Tracy and Walter Houston. At some birthday party once, Spencer Tracy said, "It's not unusual for a man to be the top man in his field." He said, "Somebody has to be." But then he said, "What is unusual is when the top man is also the nicest." And I thought, man, I may not make top man. Anyway, that's something that music could use a lot more of, just to being gentle to people. But I think it's better now. We're taking much better kids of young people now.
I think
much
so.
Better care of them.
I certainly run into my share of traumatized people, so it's interesting to try to cope with that. And I was wondering, tell us a bit about your own teaching now.
Oh, well, I teach for the City University of New York, and I'm treated very, very well. But, I'm in a branch that doesn't have much of a music program. So that's dispiriting to me because I would love to be around performers all the time. But I feel like I'm doing important work anyway. I'm exposing young people to some great music, and they treat me very well, and many respond to it, not all, but many respond. And it's for a long time I had a chorus that we would do all sorts of like musical theater-y things and have a lot of fun. So, but now of course we're all doing it from home, aren't we? And so we have to build a whole different set of muscles.
Yeah.
And we have to forgive. We have to forgive our students and ourselves a little bit while still having standards and finding what is the right path to be at.
So early in your career, you had a group called Friends and Enemies of New Music. And I actually I don't know if the group still operates.
We haven't given concerts in 10 years or so. I think it's still on the book somewhere. We've never dissolved the corporation. We might come back. But it was 6 of us who all had gone through the doctoral program. I never graduated. The doctoral program of the City University of New York Graduate School. And we formed this little group. We had 6 different ideas about music and where it should go. And it was a young composer. It's great to write for people and for them to perform your music. And that's how you learn things, really. It's a shame that young composers have enough experience with that, because you learn so much. You learn a lot of things in school, but of course they never dawn on you when you're there. They only kick into your brain when you graduate for a year or two. Then you say, oh yeah, then it's up here and it comes out. But during that school time, you don't remember anything. It's all too hectic.
How did you come up with the name for Friends and Enemies?
Well, Ben Yarmolinsky, who's a friend of mine who was part of the group, he was referring to Virgil Thompson. He said, Virgil Thompson had this group, Friends and Enemies of Modern Music. And he said, oh, well, Virgil Thompson, that's part of our clash, really. It's sort of, he was an iconoclast at the time. He was a tonal composer in a weird way, often bitonal, at the point where there was a lot of atonality. So we can adopt that and refer to that and make that sort of our mantra. So we changed it, but everybody always knew it was a takeoff on the Virgil Thompson, I think. The reviewers knew anyway, sure.
So I think as we segue into the work sample you're going to present to us, you're spoken of, Tom Cipullo, as somebody who writes with great sympathy for the voice. I'm sure
that's nice. I like it.
You know that. I'm sure you know that is said about you. And you have an enormous corpus of songs, I think, and increasing number of operas. Talk to us about your feeling about the human voice as a musical instrument and in your own work.
I also studied with Bernard Rands at Aspen one summer, and he was a great genius, is a great genius. And he said one time, I think I have it right, I'm remembering 35 years ago, so I hope I have this right. But as I believe he said, the human voice is the only musical instrument that at every utterance, every time it makes a sound, it carries with it some human emotion. And maybe a clarinet does at times, and it's beautiful, but there's something about the human voice that is all emotion. And that's what I'm interested in music. When I was at school and I was writing those dissonant pieces, and I discovered that wasn't me, your teachers, if you were writing vocal music, would cut you some slack. You could write tonal music because singers have to find their pitch. It's not easy, So, and you're responding to a poem, you're responding to some drama. So that was that was a big incentive for me to leave instrumental music behind and go to vocal. I think it's Joan Tower who said there are vocal composers and there are instrumental composers. And you think about it, there is some overlap. There's Mozart, of course, and there's some, but not that much. And you get the impression Verdi could do everything. You get the impression he could. And of course, Bizet could do everything. But there aren't that many. Really, opera composer. Which one?
I was going to ask you, so you have written instrumental music as well.
Yeah, but I don't like it. Is that, I shouldn't say that. I'm not wild about it. I think
and yeah.
I also, I also made a conscious choice at one time, a career choice. I said, I want to get known for something. I think that is the best way to go in a career. Get known for something. Like my friend David Rakowski got known for piano etudes that he did that are fun and beautiful. And George Santakis was known for string quartets. And Ned Rorem was always known for songs. I want to get known for something. And then it sort of became something I couldn't get away from after a while.
And you think, so you're known for vocal music or songs and operas, or what do you think?
I think now, to the extent I'm known, to that small extent I'm known, I am known for operas, I think now, even though my songs have been around a lot longer and I'm very proud of them. That's just the nature of opera. When people get, if you can have a little bit of success with opera, and I'm lucky because I have this wonderful publisher, E.C. Shermer, so that is a great help.
So since he's here, let's introduce him. So Sylvia, we didn't warn you about this, but we have a visitor, Mark Lawson, who is the publisher, E.C. Shermer. He is Tom's publisher, and some of you know that I have a new series, the Mark Shapiro Choral Series, which E.C. Shermer also publishes. So we can give our virtual acknowledgement here to Mark Lawson, who has been publishing Tom's operas, I think, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And we also have one of our other composers on here, Juliana Hall and David Sims, I think, are on this call too. So it's, I feel like I have one of the best jobs around because I get to work with all these wonderful people. So
No kidding. Okay, that's great. So we have other composers here. That's exciting. And you,
Juliana's here? Oh, wow, that's nice. And I don't know David Sims. We've never met. Juliana's an old friend. Great.
okay, that's great. And so we all have to promise to be buying lots of choral music when the pandemic is over, and lots of opera scores, right? So
that's well, it's the one of the things about the pandemic is soloists do get to sing, which is nice. Choirs don't get to do quite so much. So we've been seeing a lot more vocal music go through the door than than normal sometimes, I think. So
interesting. That's great. Okay. Thank you, Mark. It's
it's
nice
great.
to, I'm
Thank
glad
you.
yeah, thanks for showing up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Tom, we're at the point at which we wanted to, I think, present the opera clip. So two things. Let's first ask if there are any questions yet that
Oh,
anybody
great.
has. Vicky, do we have any questions for Tom so far?
There are so many questions. So let's break them like maybe half now and then half at the end,
Oh, okay.
potentially.
Let's take a few.
We'll take a few. So the first question is about the advent of computer music programs, which seemingly enable anybody to claim the mantle of composer. How do you think the computer has changed composing? And do you use music notation software to compose? Why or why not?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, I do use music notation software to compose. I use Sibelius, although I hear the great things about Dorico too. And it does change how you compose a little bit. Things happen faster. And if you're orchestrating, it's much faster because you copy things that go in and transpose. So it is a great tool. It manipulates things so quickly, and you build up speed with it. And then I often ask myself, now I can take this passage and just put it over here and transpose it. And then you have to say, I can do that with a little click. But then you have to say, oh no, I can't just leave it like that. I got to go back and change it. I can't just, it's too lazy. What can I do the second time to make it do? It changes, the convenience of it has a constant temptation to change what you do. I guess that's true for computers in every way and everything we do. The convenience can change everything, but you can't let it. That would be my answer.
As I remember, Tom, you were a fairly late adopter of the software because I remember using your manuscripts.
That's right. I
Yeah.
used to read, yeah, and that was very nice of your course. Unthinkable today. They used to read my handwritten manuscripts.
They were
which we'd
beautiful.
photocopy.
Yeah.
You know,
I miss
I
that
do
a little
all
bit.
that.
But yeah.
But no, anymore and do that. Okay.
One other question is, I'm going to read it verbatim. I am loving listening to this talk about creativity. There's a lot of writing about creativity that Tom has entirely and charmingly reinforced. One of those things I've read is that you have to look after your creativity, and that one of the things to do is other things and then maybe make surprising links. So what things, if any, other than music, do you find interesting and useful to your composing? And can you link out to them for us?
That's an interesting question. I don't think I'm gonna have a really good answer for that. What links to my composing? You know what? I mean, just interacting with people links to my composing, I think. Because every time that's the most, I could say traveling, but what's traveling? What's the interesting part of traveling? It's not saying some of it's the buildings, but the interacting with people actually that really makes it thrilling. You could say reading a book, but when you're, literature, but when you're reading literature, those people are real in a book. And that interaction with them affects your mind. Certainly poetry, because I've set so many songs, that's something. I don't know. These are great questions. I wish I had better answers for them. Can somebody else answer that?
Well, on a related note, so you described the difficulty of describing what it is and what it is. If you were asked to write a piece about it, could you?
To write a piece about the it of composing, what it is?
Yes, the ineffability of it.
I could write a piece about how unpredictable it is and how frightening it is and how unsure it is. Every composer who's ever lived has had the same thought: I'm never going to be able to do this again. You know, Tchaikovsky used to say, I've written myself out. I'll never be able to write another piece. And we're so insecure. That's why so many composers are so horrible to be around. No, because we're so insecure and nervous about our talent leaving us. You have a voice, a voice, of course, you can be nervous about losing a voice. If you're a pianist, let's say, you always know your technique will be there, and you may have good nights and bad nights. And composers have technique too, we do. We develop it, we work on it, but it's so uncertain. Inspiration, the role of inspiration and where it comes from and the terrifying nature of it. That would be in my piece about composing. That's the piece I would write.
Beautiful. Shall we hold the other questions till
I
after?
think so. So maybe, Tom, now do you want to set up the scene that we're going to watch?
Sure. This is great, and thank you, Sylvia. Thanks, Sylvia, for making all these things fit in that are coming up. I sent stuff to Sylvia very late, and she was kind enough to get them ready to go up. So I wrote this opera called Mayo, and it is not an opera about a condiment. It is not an opera ketchup. It's an opera about a person named Mayo Buckner. And try as I might for years, I have never been able to come up with an elevator pitch, where they say you can describe it in 1 minute. I have never been able to come up with that. So I'm going to give you sort of just a very vaguest idea. It's set against the backdrop of eugenics in the United States. And when I say that, usually there are people who say eugenics in the United States. I thought that was in Nazi Germany. I didn't think that happened in the United States, but it turns out that, at the Nuremberg trials, a lot of the defendants there said, where do you think we learned all this? We learned it from the United States. After Darwin, the sort of post-Darwinian reading of science, many people in America became consumed with this idea of better families and worried about the menace of the feeble-minded. How did I get interested in this? I happened to have come across a Life magazine article from 1958 that told the story of Mayo Buckner. And the subheading of this article was, mental homes wrongly hold thousands. And there was this man, Mayo Buckner, who spent his whole life, it's a true story, his whole life almost, at the Iowa Home for Feeble-Minded Children. That is what it was called. And it was just even though in the 50s, he lived there until the 1950s, and by the end of his life, he was given a modern IQ test and had an IQ of 120. If you believe in IQ tests, I'm certainly skeptical about them. But certainly he was above average intelligence, but he got stamped, branded with this thing, he's stupid. And so he lived his whole life there. So I wanted to write an opera about him, and I sort of made up a big story about him. And what is really amazing is this institution still exists in Iowa. I think it's called the Glenwood Resource Center now. And there's just been a current scandal about the way they were treating the inmates there and experimenting on them. So these sorts of things never seem to end. So the main character is Mayo Buckner, and also appearing in the opera is Oliver Wendell Holmes, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who wrote a famous decision that would allow for the coercive sterilization of people that were deemed unfit. So in that, if you can believe this, there's actually a lot of humor in this story, because I wanted to put that in because I find humor works. If you want to set up heartbreak, you have to have humor before it. You have to have the mix, or it won't work. So we're going to see a scene where Mayo in the institution with all the little boys sings, "If I were the smartest man on earth, I'd get out of this place." And so that's what you're going to see. The singer is Ben Edquist, wonderful baritone. The conductor is Kirk Sievertson. The stage direction is by Dean Anthony. And this is being performed. It was commissioned by SUNY Potsdam as part of something called the Pellicciati Prize. Dr. Gary Jakeway funded this prize to commission an opera in honor of his lifetime partner, Dominic Pellicciati, and they loved going to operas together. So all the pieces they commissioned should have some social relevance to them. That was part of their mission. So that's going to see SUNY Potsdam, Ben Edquist singing "If I Were the Smartest Man on Earth." Oh, I did the libretto for this, as Theo Musgrave told me to do.
I were the smartest man on earth, and by some accident of birth, I was sent to a home or an institution for some such place. I would escape, I think, vanish without a trace, my face never to be seen again. In a institution, in shelter, in a workhouse, or in any such place. If I were the wisest man in the world, I'd fly this coop, I'd disappear into thin air, and let them look both far and near. They'd find neither eye nor hair. Yes, I'd be off in a heartbeat, in a second, in a wink, and then my ink and gun for only a moment. But if I were the wisest man in the world, they'd never find me when I ran away. And where might I go, you ask? Well, I would have to think. No rash decisions, I would have to think. On top of my head, I think Lindbergh was right to fly over an ocean for all of a day and a night. But I won't be flying alone in my plane. I'll take all of you with me to France. For better to England, even better to Spain. If I were the wisest, wiliest, wittiest, cleverest, craftiest, smartest man in the world, the sharpest of pencils, the most a consummate expert beyond dispute. Imagine this enormous brain illumining this darkling eye of a plane. But I'm taking my giant brain to space! Yeah! I'd be gone as quick as a wind. On a coach or a trolley, sedan chair or ship, I vanish from this awful place. I disappear without a trace. My face never to be seen again. Yeah! An institution, a shelter, a workhouse, a poorhouse, a farm school, and a juvenile ward, and a halfway house at the Iowa Home for feeble-minded children. Yeah! Or in any such place. That's what I do. You do it too, wouldn't you? If you were the smartest man on earth.
That's just wonderful, Tom.
Thank you. Well, the Crane School of Music is a wonderful school, and Ben Edquist was a special guest artist. You know, he's a professional who they brought in to play that part, and he's a wonderful, wonderful talent. I was in very good hands.
It's a very strenuous sing, that aria.
It is, and the whole part is strenuous. It's got a lot of things to do, but.
So I have one question about that, and then I think we can go back to, I think we have a lot more questions. I was wondering if in the process of the rehearsal for that opera, did you make changes to the score?
You know, it went through a very lengthy workshop process, which I hate. I hate doing that. It's nerve-wracking and it's awful and it's painful, but it was useful because it went on for years, and I mean, a couple of years. So by the time we got there, I didn't make many changes. It was almost all fulfilled. But during the workshop we'd done a year before, I made tons of changes right on the spot that were very, very useful. So
what kinds of
the worst thing in the world? The worst thing, you know, it's very natural to compose. The worst thing is to write it down. That's the worst. And then to revise. I've met so many composers, I think a lot like me, who just hate revising. It's the worst. Once you're done, you want to get done and go on to the next thing.
And is it revisions that you're just trying to notate things more clearly, or you're really making changes?
Sometimes it's cutting out a whole thing and adding more motivation. And funny thing, opera, you know, you got to really make them. Michael Ching says, make character. Don't worry about the story. Make characters. Make characters. So, you know, if you see the beginning to Peter Grimes, you know, and I got off revision somehow, but in the beginning of Peter Grimes, there's so much character to it. Like you know, when he's sworn in to testify and he can't keep up with the words, and it's just so brilliant. And that's what you want to do. You want to find every little musical way to make this a person. It's really a lot of fun to do. So that was a lot of what the revisions were. How can I make this a richer character? And of course, everything needs to be cut. Everything in contemporary music should be shorter. Composers are too long-winded.
Good problem to have, I guess. But so let's go back to Vicky and see. So we'll have a few more minutes for questions, and then you're going to lead us in a composition exercise, I think. And
well, exercise may be too strong, a lesson of sorts.
A lesson of sorts.
Great.
So, Vicky, do we have more questions?
We do. I will read this again verbatim. If the dissonances in classical music are the primary mode of tension, do you think atonal music may lose some of their dramatic quality due to the continual unresolved chords or lines?
I think any style can work beautifully if you have the right composer and he believes in it, and it's his thing. For me, so I can only talk for me. For me, the way I approach it and how I relate, yeah, for me, I couldn't do it because it is for me. That dissonance in relation to some tonal center, that is where the expression is for me. But I certainly understand how other people can create masterpieces using completely different materials and a completely different way of thinking about music.
One other question. There's a few more. You often use spoken word phrases in choral and vocal pieces. What is that aiming at?
That's a good question. Maybe I should stop doing that. You know, I like them at the beginning because I think the trickiest thing is to get somebody into it at the beginning. How do you create? You got to create your world. So, I mean, it can't just be anything. It's got to be at the beginning of this opera I wrote, Glory Denied, because it's about memory, really. This whole story is about memory. The first line that somebody speaks is, "It didn't matter, whatever I did." And that, I mean, it just seemed to me so dramatic that then I can build from that into into the music. You can only do it if the phrase they talk about makes you want music to happen in the next beat. That's what has to happen. I tell you something, and that phrase makes the music necessary. And then you have a beginning that's a little different and a little fun, I think. That's the goal. That's what I try to do. We'll see.
And this is a sort of related question. So if you're not setting a text that you have written, what attracts you to the music, the poem that you may want to set?
Well, it's different for song and for opera. For opera, it's drama. That's what attracts you. You got to have drama and character. And for song, it's just some beautiful image. No, that's not an image. That's not right. It's some beautiful moment, some beautiful, joyous moment where your heart has a little bump, gives you a little epiphany. Why do we do it? I wish I could ask all of you a question. Why do we put ourselves through all this? I'd like to get all your opinions. Why do we do it? You know, it's so much work, music. And then the Cecilia chorus, you guys meet, I think it's, what is it, every Wednesday for 3 hours? And I know the social life is great, but it's hard work. So interesting why we do it. I think I'm getting off the subject just for a moment. But you know, we realize now in the past year how important this music is to us. And they used to say, I think it was the Greeks who said that music, and of course they valued it so highly as part of their educational system. I think it was, they said, Mark will correct me, I know. He'll know, and he'll know the exact thing. Something like music, what it does is it rearranges, it corrects all those pieces inside you somehow. And I don't know, just missing it so much, missing seeing friends and chorus members, but the good times are ahead of us. I did not answer your question at all. I should be in politics, don't you think? I just went my own way.
Well, I think one reason why we do it is for moments like this. So I do have one other question for you. In terms of your composing and how you construct your pieces, how has your writing evolved over your career in terms of style or genre of music?
I am getting simpler and simpler. I think I'm, maybe it'll change tomorrow, but I find I write things now that I look at and say, I'm so embarrassed. It's so cool. You know, as I get older, I get cornier. I think that's normal. And I get more and more straightforward, and I want everything to be easy and direct because life is too short. Easy and direct, and I don't feel like I have to impress anybody, and that's who I am. I'm not any smart guy. I'm a simple guy who feels things like everybody, and that's just what I want to share.
So I think Vicky was saying that that's a beautiful line that you just gave us.
I use it all the time.
Well, it works. I think as we transition into your exercise, I'm wondering what is next for you after the pandemic. What, you know, as you look, as in this brief span of life we have left to us, you and me, Tom, as we think about what are the things you still dream of doing, how does that work for you? Do you have specific things you want to do, or are you putting one foot in front of the other? What are you thinking?
Oh, I have a million projects I want to do. I have an opera about a televangelist I want to do for my friend Michael Mays. And then, but not like you know, an opera about a televangelist, but not completely accusing, but looking for, you know what I like to do? I like to write operas where you see two sides of people, because where no one is completely good and no one is completely bad. I like to look for that because that's the way I think people are. And we've come to a time in our life where we're always looking, we've become increasingly suspicious of everybody. And we're breaking down, you know, as we all know, we're breaking down into these tribes. We're unable sometimes to see the good in people. And it can become a challenge. So I'm looking for that. And my friend Stephanie Blythe asked me to write a piece for her. I don't know where it's going to go, but we're working on a comedy. I want to do some comedies, because that is a lot of fun. And I have a million operas I want to do, a million songs. We'll see how long I can keep it up. I don't know. But I'm writing the best music of my life right now. This is my beginning right now. So that's what I feel. This is the time. 60s. If you haven't gotten into your 60s yet, it's great. It's really something to look forward to. I don't know what happens next, but so far the 60s are wonderful. 50s are great too. 50s and 60s, that's the best for everything.
So Tom, this has been just fantastic. I think we could go on, and let's see what we do next time. But do you now want to take us through? We were going to explain to us the activity you have in which we can be involved.
So, you know, I was going to give you, because so many people seem interested in composing and how you do it and what it is. So I was just going to tell you what you needed so you could write your own song. Would that be something people might have an interest in? I hope.
I think
okay. So I'm going to give you the benefits of, you know, my 12 years in education. I'm going to give you the 3 highlights, and then we'll ask Sylvia to plug in this one little excerpt I want to show you. So it'll only take a few minutes, but so Tom, not that I need the competition. Yes.
I have to dive in. I just realized I did not fulfill the promise to tell the telephone story. There was a comment in the chat.
Yeah, okay.
So we briefly have to do that. So Tom wrote a piece for the Monmouth Civic Chorus, wonderful, where he set student poetry, and they there was a girl getting a phone call, a breakup call, I think, something like that. I don't know if you remember exactly, Tom. Something like that. And Tom, genius that he always is, wrote into the score that there would be a telephone ringing as the percussion element that started that movement. It would be very dramatic. And our good friend Dean Thomas was the percussionist. He and I still joke about this moment. It was an electric device, and in the concert, it did not work. So, it was this rhythmic thing that was supposed to really launch the whole piece, and I gave this downbeat, and there was complete silence. So I don't remember, Dean did something very clever, like he ran for a triangle or something like that, or he went to plug it in. But it was one of those moments where I think Tom remembers being in the audience for it, and I certainly remember being on the podium for it. So with that aside, Tom, go ahead. Sorry, I just dropped something over here.
Okay, so this is the benefits of my 8 years of school. I'm just going to give you the 3 highlights that you can do when you write a song. And you know, as Ned Rorem has said, anyone can be taught to write a perfect song. So first thing you have to do is you have to consider your piano part when you write your song, okay? Because a piano part must always have, and then we're going to do this pretty quickly, I think, must always have its own integrity, light, and mood. It can't just double the voice. So it has to have something evocative. Something, I don't know what it is, but it can't just double the voice. And even what? Doesn't double the voice, right? Or something like that. Okay. So it's some piano part with its own integrity, number 1. Point 2, they always taught us in music school, is remember, in your music, you never go to the same place twice, the same way. So, let's see, you have... So in Love, and then the next time. Next time a little bit higher, and then the last time. Okay, so that's point 2. You never go to the same place the same way. And then the third thing, when I was going to school, they always said, don't repeat words. Whatever you do, you have to follow the poem exactly, or you're not being faithful to it. So you don't repeat words. Now I'd like to show, if Sylvie would show this example, it's by Brahms, and the poet is Paul Heise. I don't really know anything about the poet. And the mezzo is Ingeborg Dans, and the pianist is Helmut Deutsch. But if you just watch this song for a minute, you'll see exactly what I mean. Thanks, Sylvia. Now, I wanted to play that song for you because that song breaks every rule that I was taught when I was studying. It breaks every rule, and it also breaks my heart. Every time I hear that song, it moves me to tears. And you know, the piano part, it's sort of, it's got a profile, but at the crucial moment, it sort of almost doubles or at least outlines the vocal line. It's a strophic song, so it keeps going back. It doesn't go to a different place every time. And in the, you know, and it has to repeat at the end those words. I don't know why. I don't know why I have to make this wedding gown. Anyway, so the point being, I gave you a little Rorem quote, but I didn't give you the whole thing. And this is really what I'd like to leave you with. Rorem said, I am fond of insisting that anyone can be taught to write a perfect song, but no one, not even Schubert, knows how to lend that song a living pulse and inject it with flowing blood. It's all a mystery. Nobody knows how it's done, and thank heaven. And isn't that the joy and the wonder of it and the majesty of it? And part of what makes it such a joy to be around. And that's all I have to say about songwriting. I wish my teachers had told me that. They could have saved me all that tuition money.
Tom, this has been absolutely tremendous.
Thank you.
Just tremendous, so moving. And you know, all these, when we have an encounter like this during the pandemic, I think we just feel like life will come back. You know, there is something that we really, it's deeply meaningful. So we thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to see us. And I will cede the microphone to Katie for any final housekeeping.
I can tell you that everybody I look at has such a smile on their face. This is very, very informative and uplifting moment. And I think we're really sad that it has to end, really. What a great night. Now we'll go to some business. I want to remind you all that next week we will have our regular Zoom for members. It'll be a symposium on the sacred Renaissance with pieces from Poland, Portugal, and Spain. So we'll be back to our normal login. And I hope you all enjoyed this evening. I certainly did. What a fantastic evening.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Thanks for asking me. I had a lot of fun.